Every now and then in the sports realm, you hear terms like generational talent, all-star, Hall of Famer, you name it. And you don't always hear those terms in audio, but I think it's safe to say you do hear some legends, or there are legends in the audio space that kind of transcend time and are always considered some of the best headphones in the market. And if you can't tell where this is going, I'm just going to get right to the point. This is a flagship headphone from Audio-Technica, and it has flagship pricing of $3,500, and it sounds insane. It is one of the best headphones I've ever heard. Now, Audio-Technica headphones in the high-end space, like the flagship space, has kind of had a house sound, at least on their open back dynamics. The ATH-5000 and even the 3000, which came out less than a year ago or about a year ago, are a little bit on the more neutral, brighter side. And that's not everyone's cup of tea, but they're very analytical, tight, dynamic sounding headphones. The ATH-7000 actually breaks that trend just a little bit, but to me in just the right way. You get this amazing touch of warmth, and the vocals step forward enough to be present in the mix and give you enough attack when you want it, and then the treble is just up there enough to sound airy and wide, but it's not overdone and it's not over punishing. It truly is this juggling act of balancing all the right notes and connecting everything together to give you a very musical sound that can go for hours at a time. Now, before I spend hours at a time talking just about sound quality, I want to open up with some of the things I normally do. I typically cover what's included, we'll get into comfort and build quality, and then I'll kind of get back into sound quality again at the end of this, and I will be comparing it to some other headphones, both from the Audio-Technica lineup and a few other big competitors in this space. The ATH-7000 was sent to me for review. It won't affect what I say about it. There's no money exchange in making this video, and I don't get to keep this either. If I have this after this video, it's because I bought it, so don't tell my wife. Normally I go Brad Pitt and ask what's in the box, but in this case, you get a metal briefcase. So depending on your age, this might give you some nostalgia on some old and awesome movies. This is a very similar case. It's basically the same case as the ATH-3000 that I still have. It's pretty cool. It's a different way of storing it. Obviously, if you have wonderful headphone stands like some of these, you may not use it too much, but it is a nice way to ship and present it. And if you have multiple headphones, which if you're spending this much on a headphone, you might have a collection. As far as what's in the case, you get a few things. Obviously, the headphone's going to be presented very nicely in here. Then you get two cables. So the one I've been using is the balanced XLR connector. It's 9.8 feet long. And you have this nylon jacket, if you will. It's a fabric sleeve on the jacket. It's not rubber. Included in this pouch is a single-ended. So you get the 1/4-inch plug here, or 6.3 millimeter. There's no, obviously, step-down adapter or anything for a 3.5 connection, but it's the same length and the same jacket material. Even this pouch feels amazing. The zipper quality is nice. It's just a nice way of presenting it rather than just stuffing cables in the box and having it tied up with twist ties. Now, you may not notice from this angle, but if I flip the case down, there are extra pads. These are the ATH-5000 pads. So if you like some of the things that the 7000 brings and you want to bring back the house sound, if you will, that you're more familiar with, you can do these pads. I really like the skin feel of this pad in particular. It's nice. I prefer the velvet pads for many reasons. These are a little bit more shallow. The velvet pads give you more ear clearance. But it's nice that you get that ability to swap. Now, there is no magnetic mounting system. There's no clip-on system. It's a traditional like rubber ring, so you would just stretch the pad. This fabric is not as stretchy, so to me it actually takes a little bit more work to get off and on. So just keep that in mind. It's not something you can quickly switch out just to experiment back and forth. So let's take a look at the headphone up close. And you get an A2DC connector. This is something very familiar for Audio-Technica folks, especially on the high-end stuff. I don't mind this connector. It feels great. My only complaint I have with this connector is it's not as ubiquitous as some other products out there or other aftermarket cables. So you have a more limited selection. Thankfully, this cable's excellent in quality. It's just a little too long for how I use it. If you want a 10-foot long cable so you can roam around the cabin, so be it. But I've always liked dual 3.5 just because I like to switch to much shorter cables, or if I want to use the Meze boom mic if I'm doing gaming. I like that flexibility, but I see why they use it. It's a tried and true connector, and because their flagships have been using it for so long, it makes sense to stick with that. As far as basic specs go, this is an open back chassis, meaning you don't have any sound isolation, but on the audiophile side, open backs are generally preferred. It uses a 58mm dynamic driver, and it is very efficient and easy to drive. Some people will see the spec of 490 ohms and think you need a very high output amplifier to power these things, But the real spec you want to pay attention to is the efficiency or the sensitivity. It's a 100 decibel sensitivity rating on this headphone. As a result, I can connect this to very inexpensive low power DAC amp systems and still get more than enough volume out of it. It does reward you with higher end equipment, and I think it opens up some other possibilities as far as sound signature and overall dynamics of the headphone, but you don't need it purely from a power standpoint. Now this uses something called an HXDT driver assembly, and I don't really regurgitate marketing specs. There's plenty of stuff that they're going to talk about on a flagship product, but the general philosophy behind this particular design is there is no physical dampening on the driver at all. This is an incredibly precise driver, and all of the tuning or dampening is done electrically via the voice coil. So whenever you have this and the driver is basically free to perform unimpeded physically, anytime you change the pad, all of your changes are going to be amplified because the entire impact, or I guess the behavior of how the driver kind of interacts with your head and your ears, is affected by the pad. There's no extra filter that's always taking off 3 or 4 decibels in the treble, for example. It's all done with this. So you will get very different results whenever you play around with pads. It's actually amplified more than some other products. The real reason why I brought up the HXDT driver technology talk is because of the manufacturing process involved with this. If you are familiar with like CNC machining or precision metalcraft, if you will, and tight tolerances, if you just look at an inexpensive dynamic driver, it's round. The voice coil is typically round. The magnet's round. The motor structure is round. The suspension system that basically allows the cone to move up and down, all of these things are round. And they're not exactly the same roundness. When you get something with really high precision, think of it as like down to micrometers, if you will. I don't know exactly what they're doing in terms of tolerances here, but one of the big talks is how precise that balance is. And if you have like a perfect circle times 5 or 6 for all the components involved, it's perfectly aligned. So think of everything in balance and in harmony. In theory, having super tight tolerances like this should improve sound quality, and I will talk about sound shortly, but it's worth discussing some of the work that went into this. Part of what you're paying for is that very precise, very tight tolerance manufacturing process. Another reason for a higher end price is the use of more exotic materials. And in this case, you're getting a mix of magnesium alloy and aluminum, obviously the velvet pads. And this chassis design really reduces weight significantly because even though this is a flagship headphone, it doesn't have flagship headphone weight to it. And it weighs only 270 grams. It can range a little bit depending on the pad, going from 270 to 275, but that's extremely lightweight. Now my unit is a pre-production sample. I got one of the earliest ones they made. This even says serial number 000 on it. So I don't know how much is tied to this, but I always explain and cover everything that I experience because I believe in full transparency. The chassis makes a little bit of noise when I'm handling it. Usually I don't like hearing any kind of a creak regardless of price. Maybe under $150 I can kind of accept some of that. For this price, I would have preferred the chassis to be a little bit more quiet. When I compare it to something like the Meze headphones like the Empyrean or the Lyric, for example, the chassis are dead silent. This does make a little bit of noise, and I associated it, or at least identified the source to being on this point here. If I tap it, a little bit of a rattle right there. And then this hinge design, because it's designed to telescope, which is great, by the way, this is great for sizing. If I just put this, let's say the half mark, a little bit of noise is coming from that too. It's not significant, and it only happens when I'm handling it. When I actually wear it, it doesn't do anything. It doesn't make any noise. It obviously, when you first settle it, maybe it'll move, but wearing it is dead silent, which is obviously important because when you're wearing a headphone of this price, you want to pay attention to everything that you're listening to, and you don't want to hear the chassis distracting you from that. So I want to touch on comfort while I'm wearing this. The velvet pads are incredible. I love the way this feels on my head, and the velvet pads being a little bit thicker give me more ear clearance as well. So it's very easy for me to wear for a long period of time because one, the pads are thick enough and spacious enough to fit my ears. They're deep enough, so there's some flexibility there. The headphone weight is so light that it basically disappears on your head. It's one of the best headphones I've ever worn for long listening sessions because the weight is so low. coupled with these incredible pads. So clamp force is a huge thing with comfort. It's not just weight, it's not just pad materials and clearances, it's how much it squeezes your head. And some people will have different preferences because, believe it or not, sometimes less clamp force is actually worse for comfort depending on the headphone. In this case, this headphone's really light, and because the pads are soft, it helps offset some of this, but my clamp force is closer to about 600 grams of pressure on my current measuring rig of clamp force. Now I'm going to be slowly changing that to a new system, and I'll have a video announcing this change soon, and I'll always make sure that the data I present is being measured on the same system. So when I compare the clamp force of this right now in the video, I'm showing it to you compared to other products measured with the same clamp force rig. The headband itself isn't really padded. This is squishy. It's kind of like this magic weird density to it. So it's not like a hard piece of metal hitting your head, but don't expect this really plush dissolving strap, if you will, that's really flexible, or this really big cushion. This might feel a little bit more firm the moment you first put it on, but the way this is designed between the clamp force, the weight, and the pad material, it very quickly disappears to a point where it's probably the least intrusive headphone, or one of the least intrusive headphones I've ever worn. When it comes to sound quality on the objective side, I use a Gross KB006X Pinaclone. You don't have to know what that means, but I've used the same rig to measure all of the headphones on my Squiglink site, and I'll have a link in the description below if you want to compare this frequency response to others that I've measured. When we look at the frequency response of the ATH-7000, it's pretty damn amazing because it has this little touch of warmth. You can see the lift in the mid bass at about 100 Hertz, and it really adds a nice sense of weight to a lot of instruments, whether it's guitars or pianos or my sultry voice. It's just an amazing voicing. Now, I prefer the velvet pads. I mentioned that earlier, not only from a comfort standpoint, but I like the voicing as well. I just feel like it's a more natural timbre to me. And you can see a little bit more attack here at 1000 Hertz with the Alcantara pads. I have it labeled as suede here, but I'll probably change the label later. But overall, I do like the voicing of the velvet more. It's just filled in enough where the vocals are very much forward in the mix. It stands up very nicely to that little extra touch of warmth without being too aggressive or sharp. Zero sense of shoutiness to it. And the velvet pad, when you get into the high treble, they have this similar dip here at 5000 Hertz, which I do hear. Thankfully, it's really narrow, and it doesn't really take away too much on the detail in any way because everything else around it is filled in. This one peak that's closer to 6000 Hertz and the one at 12,000, I don't quite get it at the exact same point. I actually don't get that 6000 Hertz peak almost at all. It comes across a little hotter just because of the dip that precedes it, but this peak up here, I don't really hear whatsoever. I have a little bit of a lift closer to 10,000 Hertz on my ear, but this is where the whole rig and your own hearing will greatly affect treble. I wouldn't shop measurements specifically in the treble because you're going to hear things very differently, and it's very evident here. Overall, I think the frequency response is great, as is the driver matching, and I think they just balance a good sense of musicality and warmth and natural voicing without cheating you by punishing you with too much treble to make it sound more detailed. They're doing it through high quality drivers and lack of acoustic impedance or physical impedance to the driver structure. So you're hearing everything and it sounds very dynamic, which I'll get into on the subjective side. One thing that's going to help connect into the subjective audio more is this funny little measurement, because Audio-Technica teamed up with APOS Audio last year and did the Refine collab. It's a special pad swap that was on the older ATH-R70X. And when you look at the voicing, which I'm going to add, let me turn this on, they look so similar all the way up to about 3000 Hertz. It is shocking how similar it measures. There's more of a recess here noticeable in like the 4 to 5000 Hertz area on the R70, which sounds a little bit more relaxed sounding. And then obviously you're going to have some different treble peaks, which I think is more of a byproduct of differences in headphone to rig transfer function, HPTF, same thing with your head. But I'm only showing this not to confuse you and say that this sounds the same, because this most clearly demonstrates how much more we hear than just frequency response. And that's when we get into distortion, we get into variances obviously of our own head, but the technical performance and dynamics of this headphone is so superior to an already good $300 R70. This is what you're paying for when you get a flagship headphone. Now, obviously, I just segued from the measurement of the R70XA, and the biggest difference is in the bass delivery. It's very noticeable, not only from a distortion standpoint, and I'm not talking like cranking it up. This just seems much more in control. If you're a car person, the best analogy I can give you is, let's say you have two cars going around the track at the same speed. One of them is a BMW M3, and we'll just say that's the R70. Then you have a Formula One car. They're both flying around track. You might have the same G-force, or it might be going the same speed at the end of the day. But when you're in the F1 car, you feel so much more in control. You know there's more there. Even though you're not asking it to do more, it just feels so effortless. And that's what you get when you buy a flagship headphone, is that extra level of control. The ATH-3000 has an incredible sense of control as well. It's actually shocking how good the dynamics are on this. And $1,000 headphone is not cheap. This is flagship endgame pricing for a lot of people. It's beyond the reach of people. And that's where the R70s came in as like a more attainable endgame. What stood out to me with the ATH-3000 is the technical performance, the dynamic punch, the tightness and speed of the bass. The voicing isn't as ideal. It's very aggressive at 4,000 hertz. And I mentioned that in my review as well. I wasn't as crazy about the attack there. It was almost like too clinical and too sharp, if you will. So I just did a 6 decibel cut at 4,000 hertz. I didn't feel like I had to do anything with this. And that is, again, it shows kind of the refinement in a different direction with the sound signature. And if you want some of that attack back, you can always go to the Alcantara pad. But this is mixing a lot of good technical performance that I got with the ATH-3000. Great dynamics, great sense of speed, incredibly natural attack and decay, which I actually have been touched on a lot lately just because a lot of the stuff I've been reviewing has had kind of similar technical performance. When you have something like this that has a really good sense of speed and attack, meaning that the second the note's supposed to happen, it just hits you, but it's not falling dead. You get this wonderful sense of trailing tones, which adds another sense of naturalness to it. Again, it's all these little things where it showcases why you're investing in something that's premium. And that is a really fine act to pull off. It's not always going to give you that result. The party trick of the HD100S that everyone always talks about is soundstage, which is kind of a perceived thing. There's no headphone that's really ever going to touch speakers when it comes to soundstage. But this has a unique way of presenting the notes, which is why it sounds wider. Part of it is the frequency response, because it's recessed at, like, we'll just say the 1 to 2,000 hertz area, the way it's scooped and then elevated in the treble, like the mid treble, adjacent to that, it makes it kind of push notes further out. You don't have the same sense of tightness that you get with the ADX7000. But the other big thing, it's not just frequency response, it's the chassis, because these drivers are farther from your ears and they're at an angle, and presenting the notes this way is part of why you get a little bit more of a wider presentation. It's physically changing the way your ear is interacting with the headphone. To me, it's not the superior headphone when it comes to dynamics and distortion properties, because there is so much more overhead available on the ADX7000. It's very much apparent. If you're chasing more of like acoustics and stuff and you still want a wide presentation, there is a lot to be said about the 800S and the value it brings, even at this price point of $1,500 to $2,000. It's a great headphone, but I would much rather just listen to the ADX7000 every day. To me, I like what they did with the warmth, and I think it has a much more natural mid-range and treble presentation. I'm not getting cheated out of detail, but it just sounds more musical to me, to be frank. Then there's the ZMF Caldera, which I'll admit is like one of my favorite headphones I've ever had. I had to buy one immediately after hearing it, after talking to the wife, of course, because, respect. This just has such an insane bass kick to it. It's so visceral while also extending down to 20 hertz. So if you want like not just a lot of bass, I'm not talking about adding 15 decibels of bass, something ridiculous. It's just, it digs deep down to 20 hertz, and at the same time you have this such a visceral sensation of bass delivery, almost like you're listening to large speakers. You can just sense the power behind it. The Caldera is incredible for that. The one thing I would, technically fault it for is the tonal balance isn't quite as good as the ADX7000, which to me sounds more natural. This has a little bit more forwardness at like 2,500 hertz to 3,000 hertz. It can be just borderline on the shouty side for some people, but it wasn't for me. Obviously, I bought it. It has a weird presentation of having kind of an intimate vocal, depending on the track. But also having a more elevated and excited upper treble if you're chasing more of that airiness. So you have tracks that'll sound kind of laid back and cozy, and then all of a sudden these magical notes just start dancing around your head. It's really track specific to start hearing some of those subtle qualities of it. So you get like different experiences depending on what track you listen to. It's definitely a magical presentation. It's not perfectly accurate if I'm chasing timbre, I guess, but I like the coloration it does because with the right track, it's just so special. And I think it's just an exceptional headphone. I'm going to tie it in with these two at the end here because I think they're the best ones here. Then you have the Susvara Unveil, which is $8,000. You could basically get both of these for less. This is really what you chase if you're looking for the ultimate technical performance, I guess, or microdynamics, and you're just really trying to hear every nuance you can, all the way down to the bass notes, which is not as visceral or punchy as either of these two, like the ATH-ADX7000 or the Caldera Open. But the bass and even mid to high frequencies you hear is incredibly nuanced. And if you're chasing every subtle little extraction of detail you can, that's kind of what you pay for the Susvara. It has a more relaxed vocal presentation on the Susvara, believe it or not, than these. It's actually more laid back. It just sounds a little bit more clinical, partly because the treble that follows that relaxed mid-range is more forward, which can be amazing from a detail retrieval perspective, but can also be fatiguing or sometimes just too much energy too long, depending on how you're listening to it and what you're listening to. I don't mind the Susvara Unveiled. I think it's an exceptional headphone and it's shockingly comfortable to wear. The drivers are obviously kind of risky being exposed, but I brought this out just to highlight that as good as the Susvara is and what I appreciate about it, I would rather have the ZMF Caldera Open and an ATH-ADX7000. These are just exceptional and they're slightly different. And that really shows how good of a product you can get in this price range, even comparing with some crazy expensive products. Pretty safe to say that a headphone of this caliber is going to be exceptional in gaming, and that's definitely the case here. Even if you're playing first-person shooters, you do still get a competitive edge because the imaging performance is fantastic, as is the detail retrieval, and honestly, this sound signature is just great for immersion. That bass warmth mixed with that nice airy treble just really sucks you into the game, and because it's such a lightweight headphone and you have velvet pads, I could wear this thing for hours, so it's definitely a top performer in gaming. So I made a bold statement of saying good value at a few $1,000s, and that's going to sound incredibly tone deaf, but I'm saying it with a very specific reason, and that's behind my experience of listening to countless headphones and reviewing it. Better value exists in the affordable range. You know, when you get like the Sennheiser HD 650, 600, 6XX, or the less expensive Audio-Technica R30s and R50s, the performance you get at the low price points can be excellent. The fact that this is a true flagship that makes a lot of other flagships to me sound somewhat irrelevant because of how good this is in every regard that is important to me personally. That's why I'm saying this with such high praise, because if you are seeking an endgame product, not many people are buying multiple $3,000 to $5,000 or $8,000 headphones. That's where the ATH-7000 blew me away. I know those are bold things to say. I usually don't have this high of praise of any particular product because we all have our personal preferences and we're going to value different things. Might be just the looks or comfort, or you want more bass or less, whatever it may be. I'll just be blunt, and for what I look for in a headphone and what makes me happy about headphones, what I enjoy from them, this has been one of the best audio experiences I've ever had. So I'm just sharing that I personally love the way this performs for what I'm looking for. So definitely when you're looking at this price range, look at other reviewers, look at forums, HeadFi, Reddit, if anyone that's heard it, see what their experiences are, form your own conclusion, don't listen to me exclusively, but I do hope that this video helped you learn a little bit more about the ATH-7000. With that being said, thank you so much for watching and making it to the end. I really appreciate the support. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you at the next one. Take care.